Our final session today is all about how to balance what is important to me, but in this case, you. You may feel lost in trying to balance everything in your life with the diagnosis of glioblastoma from everything we talked about today, treatment, how to decide on what treatment, what about quality of life, and everything else that goes on in your life. In this session, you will learn about the valuable resources and organizations available to you to provide support, function effectively, and to prepare for challenges ahead. Our panelists are Jessica Eichmeyer. Here, let me advance the slide. There you go. Jessica Eichmeyer, who is a physician assistant at the University of Michigan Rural Cancer Center in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Jean Arsbaker, an advanced practice nurse for neuro-oncology at the University of Illinois Healthcare System in Chicago. And Brittany Lawton, neuro-oncology social worker at Piedmont Brain Tumor Center in Atlanta. Please welcome our panelists. And here are disclosures. And our learning objective today are how to prioritize when everything is important, who is on your team and what roles do they play, and how to identify the tools and resources to create balance in your life. And I put a mirror here because I think it's important to note, as Dr. Sharma mentioned earlier, everyone is different. Everyone's case is different. So when we're going to do this session as a panel discussion based on case-based discussion of 3 cases. But we want you to think about these cases as maybe what of these cases may apply to you. So here's our first case. Jack is a 35-year-old man with no past medical history, and he works as an engineer. He's married and has 2 children, ages 3 and 6. Jack had a generalized seizure while at work, and paramedics brought him to the emergency room. The MRI showed a right frontal temporal mass, and he had a gross total resection, and pathology showed that it was glioblastoma. He recently completed the 6-week course of radiation along with temozolomide, and he's due to start the temozolomide cycles at 5 days every 4 weeks as a standard of care. And he has been on short-term disability and now considering to return to work. So in this case, we want to discuss some of the challenges that you may face or may be facing currently about how to kind of balance what things were before the diagnosis and now that, the initial intensive visits of daily visits are over, maybe fatigue is improving. Well, what are out there to help you return to work if you want to go back to work? So why don't we start with Jean, do you have any tips and tricks or what you focus on talking with your patients when you see patients about returning to work?
Yes, I think the first thing I would want to know with Jack is how he's doing, how he tolerated the radiation with the temozolomide. Has he recovered from the fatigue, if he had fatigue, and how specifically he tolerated the oral chemotherapy. He's going to go on a higher dose of chemotherapy cycles. So, knowing how he tolerated the low dose, I think would be important. Before you consider going back to work, maybe you should see how you feel on the chemotherapy. I think that based on the fact that he's an engineer, I would assume that requires a lot of intellectual functioning. And I would want, given that his tumor was in the frontal lobe, I guess I'd want probably to discuss with him, referring him to a neuropsychologist if he hasn't yet, just to do some testing of his cognition, his memory, his thought process, his focus, to see if they feel like he has the ability to return to work as an engineer. I think that would be an important information for him to have. I think if they determine that he has the capacity to work in his current job, I think he should think about whether you go back full time, or maybe you start back 1 day a week and see how things are going, or maybe half days, more than 1 day a week, but just to ease back into work while you're continuing to get your chemotherapy treatment. I think if he's not able to work, I think we would refer him to our social worker who can discuss financial issues with him, check with his employer to see if he could go from short-term disability to long-term disability in order to help him financially. I think that it's because he has a glioblastoma, it's a pretty easy process to get approved for disability. I always tell patients to make sure if you're going for your Social Security disability to actually ask for an in-person visit and actually bring your records with you. Because usually if the Social Security people have a pathology report that says glioblastoma, usually that gets them approved for disability. If he's able to go back to work, that's great. The Social Security disability just goes away. They know you're back working. But to start that process, I think would be an important thing.
Thank you, Jean. And I think we'll get to Brittany, who's our social worker, in a little bit. But before we get there, I feel like, before we get patient plugged into social worker, a lot of times they're seeing us physicians, also nurse practitioner, and physician assistant like yourself, Jean, and Jessica. And a lot of times we do a little bit of bridging of like what to talk about until they meet with a social worker. So Jessica, do you have any tips on identifying like social support for these patients when when they're going through something like this?
Yeah, I think a lot of people automatically start, with their family, who's in their area that they can lean on right away. One thing that I think about in Jack's case, and I've actually run into with other patients, are, he presented with a generalized seizure. Here in Michigan, that means if that was his last seizure, he can't drive for 6 months. Um, and is he, if assuming he's able to get back to work, how is he going to get there? And this is where he might tap into a coworker. Is there somebody who lives in his general vicinity that he can carpool with to get back and forth? So he might have to start branching out just beyond his immediate family to get some support as he goes through this.
What would you say to this is a question for any three of you, but what would you say to, what we often encounter is that, these patients, they have sometimes been a head of household or a mom who's really kept everything together at home, and they really don't like asking for help or feel like they're being a burden. Is there any advice that you have for them?
Yeah, I think that I always tell people, it's easier to give than receive, but sometimes you have to be in the receiving end. And that people in your village are offering to help because they want to help. So also do it for them. They'll feel like they're contributing to helping him manage. So I think, setting up meal systems or transportation or whatever, childcare. He's got two young children. How's that going? But I think encouraging them to reach out to people who are offering. There's a woman in my support group who always says people will either tire you or inspire you, and you need to, hook up to the people that inspire you. And they're the ones that, when they offer, they truly mean it. And I think, let them know that it's for them too.
Jessica, did you have something to add?
Yeah, sometimes I'll kind of turn it around on patients. It's if it was your loved one going through this, what would you want to do for them? And just recognize that those people around you really are there for you and they do want to help out. And it's okay to lean into that.
And kind of segueing that to Brittany, when is it like do you think is there a right time to apply for Social Security?
I would say the earlier the better, because as long as they have an application on file, you're in the system. In general, applying for Social Security disability is a long process. They say it takes about 3 to 5 months I see it go way, way further. Um, like Jean mentioned, they have a diagnosis that's under the compassionate allowance list, so they should automatically get approved. Now, are they reading that correctly? Always, not necessarily. So they have to advocate for themselves, make more phone calls, going down to Social Security Administration. So always start working on that as soon as possible and work on it with family. Encourage them to be a part of that process with you. It's a lot of work, and you got your support system that want to help you. So lean on that village.
If someone says, I feel like I could probably make it, maybe do certain things a little bit, and you don't want to hold out, is there any downside in applying early?
I would say there's no downside. I know people do have concerns that maybe it'll show up in the system that I worked and apply at the same time, or if they're denied and that it'll affect it later down the line. But I don't think there's a
Okay.
true issue with applying too early.
And we'll give a list of the resources later, but is there anything that you would highlight for helps in like finances, like paying bills or any sort of things that can help with them with their life and income maybe changing?
Right. Yeah. One of my favorite places to refer patients to is called Triage Cancer. They have a lot of resources. They can provide you resources from estate planning to Medicare to future needs to where you're doing while working, how to speak to your employer about your accommodations that you might need when you're coming back. Like Jessica mentioned, you have seizures, you can't drive for 6 months. How do you talk to your employer about that? A lot of people are scared. They're afraid that they're going to say something and the employer is going to do something. They can't legally, but they're still scared. So they have those resources on the page to help guide them with that discussion. Um, and just in general, working to go back to work. I am a big fan of careers, cancer and careers, because they have a wealth of information. They have conferences. One was just past June. They have tons of webinars all the time. They can give you resources on how to look for work, even if you have treatment again and you want to work through your treatment. They have resources for that. Um, they pretty much in anything in regards to work and cancer, they can help guide you.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think I'm gonna have to look into that triage cancer myself for my patients. Um, Jessica and Jean, do you have anything else to add for this case? No? So we're gonna go to the next case. We'll talk a different scenario. So in the second case, Susan is a 62-year-old woman diagnosed with glioblastoma 2 years ago. She completed treatment about a year ago, and she was able to return to work as an administrative assistant for a local school. She also plays piano at her church. Her routine surveillance MRI shows tumor recurrence, unfortunately, at this time. She lives 45 minutes from her local oncologist and 3 hours from the nearest cancer center. So this is kind of like a similar case to what Dr. Thomas and I were talking about, having a mix of a local oncologist and a cancer center oncologist working together. She is recently divorced. Her son and daughter live out of state. Her best friend recently moved away, and she lives alone. Um, so after reviewing all of this, I think this is now a different scenario, right? The first case you are talking about, do I go back to work? Do I not go back to work? She has figured things out for 2 years. She went back to work. She's really went back to living her life, playing piano, and now she's having to relive this again. Um, I think she has some unique challenges with distance from, traveling, like Jessica mentioned, if she had a seizure, for example, or, just having a car or paying for gas. A lot of these things can be difficult. So, Jessica, do you have any recommendations that you would bring up to patients in something like this?
Yeah, I think she's going to have to kind of really reassess what her village looks like. Presumably when she first went through all of this, she was still married, and I imagine her husband was there helping her through this. And, you know, unfortunately, things in life still happen even when you're dealing with a diagnosis like this. Now she doesn't have that same spousal support, and her friend happened to move away, who was probably there by her side when she went through all of this initially. Um, so again, I think this is where, you know, she may be leaning more into uh, her community, perhaps at church, looking at how her coworkers at school can support her. Um, you know, I think another thing that could be very helpful for her, given the distance issues, are looking into, does her, either her local oncologist or does the cancer center offer video visits? I know that has been a really great thing for our patients to come out of the COVID era, is that, you know, we really embraced that. And I think it makes life so much easier for our patients to do video visits, especially when they're coming from a distance.
Brittany, do you have any specific resources you will bring up for someone like this?
Yes. So you could always reach out to your, your oncologist, social worker. They can see if they have any local grants, anything for transportation. One of my favorite resources is American Cancer Society does have Hope Lodge in different states and different cities. So it is a place free of charge for patients and families. If you live more than 40 miles away from your treatment center, you can stay there. So if you're going to be getting surgery, radiation, infusions, you have a free place to stay, no matter how far you're away. So we've taken out that barrier, thankfully.
Jean, do you have any other recommendations?
Well, I think now is the time that she really has to think, think her whole goals, right? So does she want to continue to work? I'm assuming she's going to undergo some more treatment. Would she consider maybe moving closer to her family or to her best friend? I think having this diagnosis it's difficult to not have people that can really be there for you. So I think, to consider that, even though it's not the time to maybe up and move away, maybe you go temporarily and live with one of your children if that's possible, just to be able to have enough support to be able to get through this. I think, like Jessica said, she plays the piano for a church. That's usually, you can get support from that, but I think she'd have to and also think about her, make sure that she has had frank conversations with her children about her wishes and her advanced directives, and making sure that, while she sounds like she's still doing well, we should all do that. We should all have our affairs in order, but just to things to consider.
Mm-hmm. And Jessica, I feel like we have shared clinic before, and I feel that a lot of times we do sometimes get these patients say, "What do I tell my family?" Right? When they're not there in the visit together. You say like, "Well, what do I tell them? What am I gonna do?" Any What do you usually tell patients when they say something like that?
Yeah. I tell them to be upfront and honest. You know, you're not going to do yourself any favors by holding back information. I think that's, people end up feeling more isolated when they do that. Um, Sometimes I will, you know, this probably came as a surprise to her. It sounds like she was functioning really well and really didn't have any warning that she was going to get this bad news. So in that case, I'll often check in with them. It's like, do you want me to call your son or your daughter and tell them what's going on? Is there somebody, do you have somebody that can help support you like in that moment? Um, and a lot of times too, I think I just try to listen to them and what their initial reaction is, and try to help them sort through that a little bit. Um, but I think it's the time to share openly with your family about what's going on, acknowledge that there may be a little bit of uncertainty initially going through this. A lot of times this means, conversations with the neurosurgeon, conversations with the radiation oncologist again, what sort of treatments are available to her. So there may be some degree of uncertainty exactly what the next steps are going to look like. And she may want to have her son and daughter involved in some of that decision making going forward.
Okay. So my next question is going to go to Brittany, but you know, so sh- let's say Susan is someone who had a good amount of family support initially, community support initially, maybe didn't see a counselor or a therapist because she, kind of coped with things okay and went back. But now that she's alone and it's really taken an emotional toll on her, but it has been really difficult for her to find a therapist to talk about emotional aspect of mental health. I sometimes ask our social worker to kind of bridge that aspect. What are your thoughts on that?
Social workers can definitely provide short-term counseling with adjustments to whether it's newly diagnosed, recurrence, just trying to get through survivorship in general. Um, and so I'm a big fan of, getting the social worker involved when recurrence happen immediately. Um, and then connecting them with a therapist. It's easy as going to psychologytoday.com, but a lot of times sometimes there is a oncology psychologist that you may be able to connect with. They may be hard to find. There's not a lot, but if they are there, they will try to reach out to find you so that they're able to get that connection to cancer patients. So luckily our area has some, and they are out there.
Okay, thank you. So I think we are going to move on to the third case. Um, okay. And because Jean gave us a really great segue about retirement, but in this third case, Caroline is a 66-year-old woman who has been under surveillance with MRI every few months for her diagnosis of glioblastoma. Her most recent MRI showed continued stable disease, which is a good word. She's thrilled to hear this, but she expressed concern about planning for the future as she will be retiring next year. Caroline lives in a two-story home with her husband, who was recently diagnosed with congestive heart failure. She wants to make sure she knows how to find the right health insurance. Her family often remarks at how good she looks given her diagnosis, so she would like to know how to prepare them as well. So I think this is a good problem to have in a way that she's doing well and she's not having to worry about other people. But, life is life, and we have so much challenges in life just to live a life. So in this case, I feel like this is a case where we want to just utilize all sorts of resources. So I'm gonna go to Brittany for this first.
Yes, this is one where you're going to tackle and utilize all the resources out there. And thankfully, there's a lot of resources where states were mandated to have certain programs in place. Insurance is one of the biggest questions out there, and all states are required to have is SHIP counselor, which are state health insurance programs, and they are free, unbiased counselors that are supposed to help and guide you through finding the right insurance for you, whether it's sticking to a traditional Medicare A and B plan. Should I do a supplemental plan? Should I do a Medicare Advantage plan? What's the right prescription Part D plan for me? They are helping guide you through that. I'm so thankful they are requiring all states to have that. If you kind of want to get an idea of what your income amount is going to be when you do retire, you go to the Social Security website, you can look that up. So you can start looking at your finances and kind of see where you're going to be at time of retirement. You're going to want to start probably looking into resources and supports so that when you do have care needs, your family is going to also help you. You lean in the community, but also there are state and county resources that you can tap into. Again, another requirement of all states is that they have aging and disability resource centers. So you can contact them and ask about home delivered meals, transportation, caregivers, just about any resource out there. And you literally just have to type your state name plus Aging and Disability Resource Center, and you can be connected to them immediately.
Those are great resources. So Jane, you know, I feel like Caroline is that mom who's gone back to taking care of everybody again, you know. And I'm sure you have encountered patients like this over and over in your clinic. Are there any pitfalls that you would advise patients to, you know, to look out for in caring for others? Or, you know, favorite things to recommend?
Well, I think we always tell our caregivers of our brain tumor patients as well as our brain tumor patients, you have to take care of yourself. You know, self-care is important. You know, when you look at he's got congestive heart failure, they live in a 2-story home. I feel like I'm the person who keeps telling all the patients to move away, but maybe it's time to simplify, you know, your living arrangements a little bit. Maybe you move into a 50+ community or a place that doesn't have any stairs, or, you know, the ability, you know, some of the retirement homes that have the ability to move to a higher level of care. And I think the other thing about the insurance is to really make sure that your current treatment team is part of the new insurance. I mean, I've had patients before that, you know, well, I picked the highest level of insurance, and then it turns out that it's the most restrictive as far as where you can go. So make sure that you're saying, this is my doctor, this is my hospital. I need to make sure, you know, if you're going with one of the managed plans. So I think you know, she's doing great, but she has a long road ahead of her. So how does she, you know, help her husband manage his illness while managing her own?
So, you know, sometimes we have these patients who get really annoying calls from insurance saying that your MRI is not covered. The diagnosis code is wrong, even though the physician put in the right code. And then at 3 months later, oh, it was covered, but then the account says they owe $100,000 or something. And it's just another source of stress. And Jessica, let's say this patient says like, this is just way too much. You know, I'm doing fine. My scan's been fine. Um, can I just like go to once a year MRI or something, you know, and let's say they've been doing like every 2 to 3 months. Um, what would you like, I'm sure I know you have encountered this question. Uh, well, how do you counsel someone like that?
Yeah, yeah. You know, I think there's some room for negotiation here. Um, you know, if they're currently on a every 2 to 3 month and they're wanting to jump to yearly, you know, I would say, you know, I'm really not comfortable with that. With where you are in your surveillance journey, we might be able to stretch out a little bit to every 4 to 6 months. But you know, I wouldn't recommend going as long as a year. You know, we want to be vigilant. If, you know, we know these tumors are more than likely going to recur at some point, and we'd like to catch it earlier rather than later. Um, and and if we're going to do that, I would also want them to, you know, just be in tune with their own health and how they're feeling. And if something's changing between visits, I would want them to reach out and let us know so that we could adjust our plan as needed. And I would also commiserate with them because I have such a love-hate relationship with insurance companies.
I know. Like more than half of their job sometimes. So Brittany, let's say like, you know, I recently had a patient who actually I have a couple of patients who's having to care for their elderly patient, father and mother, who
Mhm.
are having their own needs, dementia and whatnot, and they're having to travel out of state for prolonged duration of time because there's just no one else to do that. and let's say they need to get an MRI, but they can't fly back. Are there any insurance constraints or things that they should be aware that they're entitled to about getting certain testing done out of state? It's actually a common question.
Are they asking
Like
if it's
let's
not going to be
there.
covered?
Hmm?
Are they asking if it's not going to be covered?
Yeah, like if it's not gonna be covered, it's gonna be problem if they like let's say they go to, Michigan, but they live in Arizona.
Yeah, you are going to want to talk to your insurance. I mean, if you're working with a Medicaid patient, somebody who has Medicaid, you cannot get any coverage outside of state, and there is nothing considered a transfer of Medicaid to a state to another. That's a common misconception. So you are going to want to contact your insurance company to see what kind of out-of-state benefits you do have before you actually proceed with doing it.
Okay. All right. And then to make plans accordingly with that. And then that, of course, can be challenging. I think it's important to fold in your team early of travel plans like that so we can brainstorm together, I'm sure. Um, um, all right. So it's a few minute, or I think maybe just few minutes early from this session's time, but I think we can maybe go to, so here are all the resources that we have talked about, um, things about work and kids. And Brittany, thank you so much for putting the resource page together. Um, Jean, do you have any favorites that you have used?
Well, of course, I'm going to say the ABTA. Um, some of these I'm thrilled, thanks to Brittany. I don't know some of these, like the state health things, and I think the American Cancer Society. And then I think, like Brittany, I think said there's a lot of state-based financial things where they'll just send you some money, just because if you apply and have a glioblastoma. So
Mm.
um
Yeah. And then here are the logos of those places. Um, And of course, the ABTA patient services, we're not saying this just because it's an ABTA session. I think it, it was so great to ask all the speakers at today's session and no one to have turned it down and even though it's a pure volunteer work, because I think we all know how helpful ABTA is to our patients and we want to be there to help. Jessica knows that I do put these links on our visit summary and it is very helpful. So I think if you haven't already, you probably have if you're in this session, but if you haven't already, please do check out the ABTA resources. Okay, so I think we can go to questions and answers.
All right. Yes, we will now take some questions. We do have a few coming through. Um, this first one I have here, it was actually kind of very similar to one of the cases. So I love, Dr. Umamori, that you suggested placing in that mirror as a reflection to some of these likely experiences that our patient population is going through. So somebody they actually submitted their age, and that they were a college professor, and they're really learning how to balance life. And just about a year ago, they started experiencing seizures, and they're really trying to understand when should they stop working. For reference, they did provide their age. They said they were in their 60s.
I think what I first ask is, if you could, do you want to continue to work? I think as a college professor, I feel like I feel a little kinship as, I'm also in academics. And when you talk to your friends, they say, talking about a job and a career is a little different. It's not so cheesy as necessarily maybe calling, but being a professor and teaching, it does it's a way of life and it's something that gives you an identity of who you are and what you do in a teaching position. So to some people, perhaps stopping working is not so much taking away burden, but it might also be taking away something that gives you a sense of identity of who you are and what you do. So with that said, I think, some people may not want to stop working if they don't have to, and maybe they want to do partial work. and maybe retirement is not necessarily they 100% look forward to. Maybe they want to do part of it. So I think it depends on like what is able to be accommodated through the university. Is there any possibility of part-time work if you want to continue some involvement with student project, for example, or adjunct appointment? And with that said, having a conversation, open conversation with HR department about what is available in terms of combined disability and things like that, and how much, you might have some time already banked up. So I think I would take all of those things into consideration. I would say if you don't necessarily get a lot of enjoyment and fulfillment out of the job, and if you want to explore other things and it's before you and I think it's a perfect time to stop working and stop grading papers. So that's what I would say. What do you guys think?
I think a lot of times, and not just as a professor, but if there's other people out there, you have to make sure you're still able to do your job, and so sometimes if people are starting to say, oh, my boss is saying I'm not, I don't have enough focus and I'm not, you try to explore ways that we can help people to be able to function. Are there accommodations? But you don't want to get to the point where you get fired because you can't do your job. And people say, well, they can't fire me because I have a brain tumor. No, but if you can't do your job, they are able to terminate you. And then it's too late to get disability. So I think it's a fine line between being able to work and wanting to work and, having the ability.
And then to that aspect, I do want to kind of caution, we want to believe in people's goodness, but also we know the real world is real world. And, as someone who is in a leadership position and employs some other folks, I know that you have to give people like a remediation plan or some sort of plan to improve their quality of work if I notice there is an issue. But that may not be the case for every company, especially if it's like a small company, a startup company, they may not be, their HR might not be as robust. I have seen patients who get terminated without proper plan of quality, work improvement, for example, and end up in a lawsuit when they thought that they were being supportive. So I think being open with employer is one thing about letting them know what you have. I mean, you don't have to, but I think it can be helpful. But when you do, ensure that like, if can you make sure like have it in writing if your work is okay, and if so, what is the improvement they're looking out for? So it's not, you're not so blindsided, and you can also have that in writing to protect you. And it's very unfortunate that is what we see sometimes, but what you don't want is to end up in that situation. Brittany, do you have comments about that? Stuff like that? Do you see anything like that?
Yes, I know patients want to work as long as they possibly can, but I really encourage that when we start seeing that maybe it's just not possible, like Jean mentioned, we don't want to see you get fired. I've unfortunately been in a position where I'm really I have to get involved very much with HR because we're causing very high financial mistakes. And so working very hard to ensure that they do not get fired. So, counseling the patients on we really need to do these things before we get to this point. So
I think this is one scenario too, where if there's a question about job performance or the cognitive function, where neuropsych testing can be very beneficial, because it's not just, can you remember these 3 words at the end of your exam? They really delve into things at a granular level. And for some people, it has made their decision about whether they continue working or not. And it's been very informative for them. And sometimes until you see it all broken down like that, you might not quite be aware of how much you're affected by it, or by what you've been through as far as surgery and your treatments. So I think that can be helpful as well.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
Thank you. All right, so our next question here is referring to improving your house. So let's say the patient is experiencing some mobility issues. They might need to have some house remodeling, reconstruction to be done to meet those needs. Are there any barriers to getting permission from the city's township? Like, any suggestions for how the family should go about this?
For a ramp for the home at the outside of the front of the home, you may need to contact your county to get a permit, because it's an extension of your property. So you're extending the length of your home technically. So you would want to check with your county if you need a permit or not, depending on the length of your ramp.
Great,
That's a
thank
great
you.
tip. How about inside? Anything to do inside? Do you have to do anything?
There's no issues with any modifications in the home. The only thing I do let patients know that is that chair lifts are not covered by insurance, because insurance considers that a home modification, and their insurance is not going to pay for you to redecorate your home, is what they call it. But so that's just an FYI. I let patients know.
I have had some patients be able to get the sales tax waived if we provide a letter stating that they need it. So you might get a little bit of a discount there, but
Yeah, I think it's like $90.
It's still a good chunk.
It's something. It is something. So it's very easy. We just write a script and they just submit it.
In addition to ABTA's financial aid program and the other financial aid resources that we have available on our website, one of them is about home modification. So just to offset some of the costs. So feel free to check that out on our website under the financial aid section. All right, next question we have here is how to balance between having visitors coming to visit the loved one and maybe with the idea of this might be their last few days of life or their last stages of life, and balancing rest. And I would think it is the caregiver had mentioned that they want the visitors, but afterwards the patient is really wiped out for the next few days. So any suggestions for kind of how to balance this?
I have at times even recommended to patients and families, put a sign on the door, please limit your visit to 30 minutes. Um, and just set that boundary from the get-go. And just be honest, the energy reserve just isn't there like it used to be. Um, or ask people to please call ahead before you come over. Don't just drop by like maybe you used to do. Um, if the patient is still able to get around fairly well, and you're talking about, like the big holiday gatherings or a big birthday gathering, giving the person dealing with the tumor permission, just, you can leave the party and you can go lay down in this room if you need to get away for a break, especially if this is going to be, like an all afternoon party. If you need to leave and take an hour nap, go and do it. And just be upfront that you need to pace yourself.
I think, like I said, one of my patients says, do they tire you or inspire you, right? So you get people say, oh, having a brain tumor has given me permission to do things I would never do before, such as, okay, it's time for you to go now. You can only stay. And so I think it's okay. No one wants to be the one that overstayed their visit and caused more problems. So and I also think setting up a calendar, set one person. This is the person who's in charge of visitors. Let us know when you want to come. And we're asking that the visits stay under, at 30 minutes, but keep a schedule and say, no, Wednesday's not a good day because we already have 3 people coming, and have set up some limitations so people are ready for it.
And just have some like lines ready to go, because you may be fine to say like, all right, it's time for you to go now. And it is a little refreshing to be able to say that, but some people just don't like saying something like that. but there are certainly like an easy go around in terms of, like knowing what time to say like, yeah, looking forward to having you here, but just so you know, we do have this next, and then just so they know, and then also or like, well, that was great and it was great. You're just having that like exit line ready does make things less awkward because, you know, when they think it might be the last time, they may not want to go, you know.
Thank you so much. The next question we have here is about asking for help. I feel like oftentimes when patients or families are in the throes of this, they're quite overwhelmed that when somebody asks for help, that's almost like, I need help with everything. Any thoughts with maybe how to ask for help and provide maybe a structured way to maybe delegate some tasks, I know, Brittany, you had some resources like Meal Train or Caring Bridge. So I don't know if you could kind of speak to that.
Yeah, so those are exactly what those apps are for. I mean, you can set up a calendar and say, Jim has an appointment or on Monday, would somebody able to drive him? Or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday would be really helpful if somebody would bring us dinner, because we're going to be at the clinic all day, we're going to be really tired. So all of those apps are able to really tell you, like, this is what we're going to need. Can you help us? And everyone has already expressed to you, how can I help? They're going to do it for you. Your village is ready for you. So you let them know this app is out there, set it out, and I promise you, they are going to be clicking on it to help you out.
That sounds wonderful. Like it takes away the burden of directly asking, but
Mhm.
also, utilizing the help that is ready and they want to help you, right? So that sounds awesome.
And you can even have a non-family member be the one in charge of it, right? So then you're not asking for help. Your good friend who lives out of town who doesn't know what she can do. You know what? You can be in charge of this. We'll tell you when we need something, you put it on the sheet. So then they're not the ones asking, someone else is asking.
Great, thank you so much. The next question we have here kind of speaks to the heart of this session. So early in the planning stages for this meeting, I recall Dr. Umamura, you having this idea about this session is really how to balance everything when everything is important. Any like thoughts on how patients can go about really prioritizing what is urgent versus what is important? Because everything might seem urgent, but not all things are
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. I think the power of notebook is great. But also nowadays we have computers. And in a notebook, you might just put things down, put things down, put things down. And then some people are really organized, but a lot of times you might lose that piece of paper you jotted down on. Like, and a lot of times people are taking like intense notes in clinic and they're looking around and it just gets so hard to know like where you wrote things and then where was I supposed to ask and then which one of this. I think having a one organized, even a Word document or Excel sheet or something like that, where you just put in the categories, even in categories maybe that we talked about today, you know, medical, quality of life, resources, where to ask for help, put them into a bucket. And if you're a journal person, you can then organize it at the end of the day. But putting things in the bucket so you can kind of see the whole thing in one place is going to help you look at and then you can also see, have you actually prioritized all of them? Or are you only focusing on one thing? Is one thing tying to another? I think you definitely need yourself or your caregiver need to have a bird's eye view of what's going on. In medical care, and we use something called SOAP note, which is to make sure that we pay attention to subjective what patients are saying. We pay attention to what we're looking at objectively, the O part, and then assessment part, not just, and putting it all together. And then when we plan everything out, the plan of action, and we are obligated to put that in one document so that way we can assess the whole picture. So I think it is really important to have just one place you can look at easily, rather, of course, having the source of the multiple books or of notebooks that you have kept is good, but you want to organize it in a one place that you can look at where you can kind of assess how, and then also when you're thinking about one thing, think of it in all the other buckets together because they all tie together. It's not just one thing. And like you said, they're all important. So, Emily, you guys were so great at helping me come up with an idea. We said, what are the things that patients struggle? And I feel that, in clinic, as someone's individual doctor, we talk about the medical thing. But then I know when I leave the room, they talk to someone like Jessica and June about something else, and they talk to about the nurse something, and they're all so important. And then the patient is the common denominator. You're dealing with all of this and kind of juggling all these balls in there and having to catch it. So that was I hope this is helpful.
Tying in with the juggling analogy, I can't even remember where I first heard it, but it's which balls are you juggling that are the glass balls? Which ones can you not drop? Which ones are going to bounce if you drop them? So maybe your own health appointments, getting your prescriptions covered, family needs. Those are kind of your glass ones. Baking the cupcakes for the bake sale. Maybe you were really involved in the PTO, but you know what? That one can probably bounce, and it's okay to let that one go. So I think sometimes thinking about all these things in that kind of light can be helpful.
And who's there to catch them with you, Those are
Yeah,
those
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That reminds me of something I've heard through being a part of this organization and working with wonderful professionals like yourself is really identifying who's on your team. Not only family wise, friends wise, but also, healthcare professional wise. And oftentimes through a sickness or diagnosis, you kind of see who's on your team. And I think it's important to identify those people who you can lean on, especially if it's a dynamic of just a patient. Maybe they're alone and they do need that support, or a patient and a caregiver, and the caregiver is feeling that burnout or burden. Really identifying those people who are there to help support you.
So I'm gonna tie this answer to one of the question that I see that's
Yeah.
still unanswered is, if someone is no longer wanting to do treatment for tumor, is there a point of doing MRIs? I think depends on like what your importance is, right? So when you're juggling things, as your life goes on, glioblastoma or not, some things are more important to you and some aren't. And if you feel that no matter what the MRI shows, all your other life aspect, treatment or not, is not going to change, maybe doing MRI does not really fit into your life. That's the ball you can just eliminate. So you don't have to juggle that scheduling aspect. You can still see your doctor, right? But maybe you don't need a scheduled MRI if what happens to you has nothing to do with what you're going to see on the MRI. So I think those are the things to think about. And other things is, so there's a question that I think with the same person who asked about her son about someone who has a blindness, so there's an aspect about clinical trials, what can happen, but also how to function with blindness. Blindness can happen, hearing problem can happen, speech difficulty can happen. Every symptom is different based on where the tumor or the necrosis or inflammation is affecting, or sometimes recovering from seizure may not happen completely. So what happens to someone's symptom is very individual. How to live with that is also very different. And maybe you want to add in a factor about getting an occupational therapy to see if you can live with that type of blindness better. If there are people who can help go to, like using the app Brittany mentioned about maybe going to all the appointments, someone can always be there to be that person's eyes for them. So I think those are the different things that you can utilize for resources.
Specific to that, I've cared for a patient for a while now. He's one of the glioblastoma outliers, but lost his vision in his early 20s. but has since been able to go on and actually finish their master's degree. But they here at University of Michigan, where we've got a really good eye center with neuro-ophthalmologists, also tied in with the low vision clinic. And through that, this person got referred to a school for the blind where it was a several month program where they work with people with vision loss to help them learn how to walk with, use the white cane, how to learn how to read Braille, and tying them into all kinds of different resources for people who have lost vision. And I apologize, I don't know the names of specific organizations off the top of my head, but there are additional resources out there for vision loss.
Great. Emily, was there any other questions?
I think that is it. I know, Brittany, you mentioned that somebody did ask a question. If you wanted to reiterate it, feel free and feel free to dive more into it.
Yes, I answered someone in the chat, so I just want to make sure everyone got it. They asked if you have to be on disability for 2 years under compassion allowance before Medicare starts, even with the fast-moving nature of this disease. That is correct. But once you start disability, you have to wait 24 months until you are on Medicare, even if you have a diagnosis that falls on compassionate allowance. Unfortunately, there's no way to get around it. So you do have a 24-month waiting period.
But sometimes they retro when you were
Mhm.
disabled, right? So if you apply 6 months after you were diagnosed, sometimes they retro that. Is that correct? Like
I-
when you that they move the date to the date you became disabled, even though you didn't apply for many months. I believe that's right.
I would have always said yes, because when you get approved for Social Security disability, they will actually start you at the date of disability, which
Right.
means you will then get retro pay.
Right.
And so then they do go from date of disability for those.
Great, that's all the time we have for questions. Any last comments?
No, thank you so much for the panelists. This was great. I knew you
Thank
guys
you.
would be great, and you guys were.
Yes, thank you all so much for this didactic session. We really appreciate it. And just thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. So this now concludes the ABTA's patient and family meeting, Beyond the Diagnosis, Beyond the Challenges, Balancing the Challenges of Glioblastoma. If you were unable to get your questions answered or want to keep the conversation going, we do encourage you to join our earlier speaker that you heard from today, Dr. Ankush Bhatia, for a week-long Ask the Expert, which will be taking place next week on ABTA's online support community Connections. Start sharing your questions now at abta.inspire.com and get your questions answered. Additionally, we invite each of you to join us at the ABTA 2025 National Conference. So if you enjoyed this virtual program, we will have a 2.5-day virtual program taking place in September and also in person in Chicago. So for Chicago, it's $40 to attend, and online it is completely free. The National Conference is the nation's largest patient and caregiver focused educational conference for the entire brain tumor community. Feel free to scan the QR code to check out the website, register now, and I also just sent the website link in the chat. Lastly, we encourage each of you to take a few minutes to complete our meeting survey by scanning the QR code on your smartphone or going to the link in the chat, which I'll send it there briefly. And you also should have received an email with this survey as well. So if you can just share your feedback with us, as it is important for us to consider future programming. I would like to now welcome our chair, Dr. Yoshi Imamura, to just say her last few closing remarks with us. We really appreciate you, Dr. Umamura, for all your time, effort, and leadership in putting together this program. We're really going to miss meeting with you weekly, as I feel like this has been quite a few months long adventure leading up to this big day.
No, thank you so much. So Emily, Mindy, and everyone else at ABTA, thank you for being patient with me as I figured out what buzzwords were and things like that. But at the end, I hope we were able to kind of marry, what gets, if people don't attend, they're not going to hear this. So I think we did have to balance the modern technology and how to get people's attention. And I do hope this program brought some light. Of course, it's not going to be answer everything, but we tried to answer all the questions that came through. And I think this is going to provide people with tools of how to ask question. And, it's a common question. Did I ask the right question? What else should I be asking? I can't even think of a question right now. And maybe they can, if you have even one or two tools that you can take away from this, that would be a great win. So thank you so much for inviting me to chair this meeting.
Thank you so much. The pleasure has been ours. Additionally, I would like to thank each of our speakers for taking the time today to share their insight and expertise. And also, I would like to re-thank our sponsors, Novacure, Imvax, and Telix for their support of this meeting. Without the time, effort from each of these individuals and organizations, we would not be able to bring you this quality educational programming that has brought together the entire brain tumor community. And most importantly, I thank each of you for joining us online today and being a part of this community. We hope you have found our meeting to be full of new information, resources, and support. And we want to let you know that the American Brain Tumor Association is here for you. To stay connected with us and learn about more of our programs, events, services, feel free to visit us at our website, abta.org. You can email us at info@abta.org, call our care line, 1-800-886-2282, or feel free to connect with us on social media. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again at the future meeting.